Hello, headphone mixers. My name is Paul Third, and that man to the opposite side of me is Emrah Celik, an award-winning mix and mastering engineer with over 3 billion streams to his name, with 90% of those mixes being done on headphones. Now, this week we are going to, as Emrah said earlier, poke the hornet's nest. We are going to probably enrage a few people because we are going to be talking about a holy saint of headphone mixing. We are going to be talking about Sennheisers, but not just any Sennheiser. We are going to be talking about the famous Sennheiser HD650, which is one of the most popular headphones of all time. Actually, Emrah, how old is it actually? Because you told me earlier. How old is the 650?
They are here. These are 22 years old.
22? Wow.
No, not mine. I mean, the history.
Yeah.
And I think HD650 is 28 years old.
Wow. That is a long
That's
time.
almost 30 years old.
Yeah. So we're
talking about.
Yeah, we're talking like old tech, right? So
it's a fucking dangerous topic.
It is, yeah. Because obviously many people have used it and loved it and blah de blah. However, I'll start poking just the hornet's nest even more. I will say that it has only been maybe the past 5-7 years that people have really started to look into mixing on headphones professionally. I always found that when I speak to other mixers, again, kind of mixers older in the tooth, headphones were always a secondary reference. There weren't many mixers out there that were confident enough to just mix on headphones solely. So, I always find that, the Sennheisers, for me, anytime I've listened to them, I've always found them to be, quite pleasant sounding, decent sound stage, but I've always found them to be a little bit kind of, I don't know, maybe audiophile-ish, right? But however, that man Emrah Celik has used them. He has worked on them as well. So Emrah, tell the audience why you think the Sennheiser HD650 has been such a staple for a long time, and then we can kind of go into the real objective points of it.
Yeah, these are, to me, are the benchmark of the mid-range and high-end. They are pretty stable. They are pretty okay, and you can change everything. You can simply use some mods to change the quality. That's why they are very, very famous, very popular, and they works. In case mid-range and the high-end, they are perfect. It's super easy to listen. It has that laid-back sound signature.
That's why I said earlier I was a little...
Yeah.
I've always found them to be a little bit audiophile-ish because I do find them really enjoyable to listen to. However, what's the reality of actually mixing on the Emrah? What's your honest opinion?
Yeah, the problem with these, to me, it has pretty tight clamp force on them. If you are using for the first time, you're gonna feel the clamp force, and that hurts. Especially for us people who has to use eyeglasses. It hurts. They are not as comfy as people think, but they are lightweight. They are pretty open, They are pretty good. But biggest problem with these, they don't have sub. So you can see a big roll-off. You can hear big roll-off. And the moment you start to boost, because you have to add 8 dB to get that.
It's a lot.
Get that sub, and they start. They are distorting easily, and they are not easy to drive either.
Now, what I'm going to do is, just to interject here, now I'm going to plug the Discord a little bit, but just because I actually have a section in my Discord that Emrah's on as well, where I go through a lot of headphones and I calculate the power for really max headroom. So what an amp would need to be able to drive them cleanly with enough headroom. Now, I do have the Sennheiser HD600 and the HD650. Now, what I have for those is 11 milliwatts. 11 milliwatts might not sound a lot. However, at 300 ohm, again, there's less voltage that an amplifier can provide. So for the 650, you are going to need an amplifier that does work well with high impedance headphones. A lot of interfaces, modern interfaces actually do. So I do think it would probably be able, most interfaces would be able to power it relatively cleanly. But just to make sure, you can go minimum topping EX8 or topping E2X2. It's normally with modern interfaces, it's normally the opposite way, where it's normally lower impedance headphones that they struggle with due to current demands with like planar magnetic headphones, yada yada. But we'll go into all of that next week when we go through in depth about headphone amps. So yeah, so they're relatively, could be difficult to drive dependent on the quality of your headphone amp and your interface. But apart from that, Emrah, what would you say is the sound stage? Because I always hear many people talk about the imaging and the sound stage, and it's very holographic and blah de blah de blah. How do you feel that the imaging is like for mixing?
No, if you never used something like that before, they're gonna, when you first time you put on them, you're gonna feel like, oh wow, what an expensive sound stage and stuff like that. But they are not actually too wide or they are pretty much narrow, being an open back. They don't create a speaker-like sound on your head. That's why I'm having problems with these when I'm mixing or trying to mastering. But as I said, the build quality and everything else is perfect,
Okay.
But they are not comfy. But sound stage is not that big, especially after you heard, iPhone Man and some
very
cheaper
open
cheaper headphones. The one we reviewed, right? The
R70X.
Yeah, they have better sound stage and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why these are too popular or called legendary. But when people produce new audio interfaces and stuff, they always take this as a reference.
They do.
This is interesting. Maybe these are very popular. That's why, and almost everyone has it. People who work with headphones.
And I think probably the reason why, Emrah, is because what I said earlier, they were probably most likely used as a secondary reference. So again, they wouldn't have been EQ'd, so you didn't have to really worry about that much about the bass distortion. So it was probably a thing where you'd stick them on your head, and if the mix sounded, good to you, then, oh yeah, that sounds fine. Quick reference check away. But physically mixing on them, when I listened to, again, this isn't the 650s, but I listened to the new HD 490s and the 600s when I was at Ed Thorne's studio. We always geek out when I go to his studio. He's got the 600s and the HD 490s. And I always find that Sennheiser always has this kind of thing where they've got like a sound where it's like kind of everything is kind of relatively in front of you and stuff, but it's not really like speakers. I never really find that it sounds realistic. I always find Sennheiser sounds a little bit fakeish. It's like everything's a little bit grainy and they're a bit too relaxed. I think, is that the same thing with the 650s, that in regards to judging compression, the transients are just kind of too soft and too relaxed? Is that a good judgment, do you think?
This is the issue with Sennheiser. They have HD 800, 820 and stuff. Opposite. They have, really fake wide sound stage.
Yeah.
And they sound fake. The stereo image is like, you had, what was it called? A plugin called Wider, the free plugin.
Mm-hmm.
Like you turned all the way to 200. That's how wide they are.
Oh, is that the 800S? Is that the 1,100, 1,200 pound like silvery ones? Yeah.
800, 820 maybe. I don't know. But these are not that wide. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like I'm listening to speakers. But interestingly, when I listen to them and try to enjoy the things I listen to, it's given me that enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to listen to. The smoothness, the vocal range and hi-hats and everything, they just too perfect.
I know what you mean. Too smooth. Yeah.
Too smooth and too perfect. Yeah, I mean, they are forgiving.
Very forgiving, yeah.
Yeah, they are not brutal like Are Organic or Ananda Nanos and something like that.
And I think that's very, very important to talk about, because when you're mixing on headphones, one of the things you really, really, really need to get right is your transients, because that's something that if you go to big studios and again you have very, very good speakers, what you'll find is the transient response is the thing that many big mix engineers have told me in the past is the reason why they don't mix on headphones is because they're like, I just don't get the same transient retrieval in headphones. And if you think about if Sennheiser's, the HD650s were like the staple, and that's what people were used to as a benchmark, then obviously that's going to, impact people's impression on mixing on headphones. I would go as far, Emrah, to say that the HD650s and Sennheiser as a brand have kind of been not the problem, but one of the biggest reasons as to why many speaker guys or girls have been in a place where they think that they just cannot mix on headphones. Because I struggle now. When I listen to the Nanda Nanos and I've got all of these kind of fast transient details, and it can be quite unnerving at first when you've got all those details, because all of a sudden you start hearing flaws in mixes, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, but this is my favourite mixer. Yes, they're not all fucking perfect. And, sometimes you hear things that maybe have been missed. But when you hear all that detail, that means you can control it all. And I think that that's a big issue with every Sennheiser I've listened to. 490 has not been any different. But as soon as I've got them on my head, I'm just like, yeah, this feels like it's for listening enjoyment and not for mixing. Transient response is really, really important. But also, as you mentioned, the low end. Like, I take it, like, how distorted are we talking if you get them that boost to kind of Harman or where you like it? Is it really, really noticeable?
You're completely right about it. Maybe these and Bear Dynamic, the Tesla drivers, will be the reason that people cannot mix on headphones, or they think. I completely agree with you. I think you have a good point on there. Maybe that's why we start to understand more that people say that you cannot mix on headphones. Maybe that's because they use these headphones and Bear Dynamic and Tesla drivers and stuff. Yeah, you have really big chunk of low end missing in these, and they can handle pretty much 4 or 5 dB, but you really need to add like minimum 8 dB to get that sub frequency, and that's not even sub. Mm-hmm. It's just making the sound a little bit fuller.
Yeah.
Because you just can't produce something that is missing.
Correct.
And they don't have it. It's like working with the 5-inch speakers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compared to the 12-inch.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, it's like mixing with a low cut on your master bus.
Yeah, I agree.
You have a low cut and you're trying to mix. Maybe that's why. Or maybe these are very popular due to people used to, the NS10M are also popular, right?
Yeah, because they've not got the low end, but
they don't have the low end.
Yeah, they've got all the mid range.
And they have all the mid range and stuff. I don't know.
But however, saying that, Emrah, the one thing that the Sennheisers do have is that they aren't shouty, they aren't fatiguing like the NS10s.
No.
So probably what many people would like about them, very probably similar, say, to the Odyssey MM500s. Like Manny's tuned them almost like a pair of fucking NS10s, but actually that 3-4K ear gain region is actually boosted to kind of fatigue you a little bit like NS10s. Where with Sennheiser you don't get that. It is very smooth.
Because they are too forgiving to me. You are missing a lot of things, but for overall picture, bigger picture. Big picture, they sounds fantastic.
And I think that's what's really, really important is that I talk about it quite a lot, where I always do like to have a big picture headphone in my arsenal. So if for example, if somebody handed me a pair of 650s and I didn't have all the options that I have, I probably would keep them in the same vein when I did have the Sony MDR MV1s before I sold them. What I liked about them is that they did do that kind of Sennheiser thing where it was like very smooth, very resolving in the high. Well, they were a little bit toppy because of, it's a long story short, but they're kind of made for Sony 360, so that was the whole thing. So they were brighter, but overall I think imaging wise and comfort wise, they just kind of told me the big picture, and I always found that if a mix sounded right on them and balanced, then it kind of sounded right. And do you maybe think that that's the reason why they've been kept around so long, because it's almost been a little bit of a audiophile-ish thing where people have enjoyed listening to them so much that they've kept them, and they just enjoy listening to their mixes on them, and they become just like another reference. So You know, it's never been a thing where like people think that they're mixing headphones. It's genuinely just been a headphone that they actually like. So I think what we're saying is they don't sound shit, as Emrah said. They have a sound to them, you know, that Emrah likes for listening. But for mixing, it's fundamentally missing a lot of key elements that we think that a headphone should have. Unfortunately, I know many of you that have HD650s would love us to say, yes, we definitely do recommend the HD650s for mixing, but hopefully our rationale behind it has kind of given you a bit of insight as to, you know, the opinions. Again, Emrah's tried to work on them many times. He does enjoy them. But, you know, not every headphone is suited for mixing, and hopefully over time we can dispel a lot of the kind of staples and a lot of the, you know, no, I wouldn't say myths, but, you know, a lot of these kind of cherished headphones that have been pushed in to the studio market by, you know, the audio world, and be like, yeah, you need Beyerdynamics Studio, Sennheiser's Studio, that studio, when really I'm sitting there looking at Odyssey's Hyphaman FT1 Pros are in my bag, the Audio-Technica R70XAs, and other headphones as well. You know what I mean? Like, we don't use the staples, do it, Emrah? You know what I mean? For good reason. And know what? Actually, we probably will have to do a video, Emrah, about Beyerdynamics, won't we? Like, we probably have to fucking poke that bear as well. So yeah, there will be a video talking about Beyerdynamics. I have said many times that, you know, for translation, I think they are arguably one of the worst headphones of all time for translation. Head mixes that sound good in bears never hardly fucking translate outside the world. They've got this weird, I call it a bear bubble, where you will listen to really popular mixes and really big mixers, and they will make you believe that you can mix better on them because they just sound a bit shitty. So you listen to like big mixers like Serban and Spike Stent, Manny Marroquin and stuff, and you'll be like, yeah, I could improve that, I could make it better. And then all of a sudden you mix to the sound of the headphones, you think your mixes sound better than Spike Stent. And then all of a sudden you take those mixes out into the real world, and all of a sudden you're like, this sounds terrible. And then all of a sudden you believe that everything else sounds shit and that bears sound the best. I mean, translation's king. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to leave it there. Is there anything else you would like to finish up on?
No, these are something that people definitely should try. You know, maybe that's the mid-range or high-end you are looking for.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to use them. I never use them for mixing because they don't translate for me. So this is your decision. I'm not going to say anything else.
And there you have it. That's one man's opinion over there. Doesn't translate for him. Might translate for well for you. Try them out, you know. But what we do advise is that if you are trying to compare headphones and stuff, again, do try a pair of like Ananda Nanos, something that have the speed to really show you what you're missing, transient-wise, to really show you how relaxed they are, to really show you what happens when you have to EQ that low end, to really show you the low end that you're missing. So yeah, there you have it. There's another video for you. Hopefully we've not pissed off too many people.
Hopefully.
Hopefully we've not poked too many bears. But yeah, there you have it. My name is Paul Third. That's Emrah Celik. And we'll see you next week when we talk all about headphone amps.